I'll lower my voice then. This sounds rather ominous. Well, I come at this issue from the simple fact that as the Maricopa County Attorney, I can't help but be involved in issues involving immigration in general and illegal immigration in particular, because, and I don't know how many other statistics have been thrown out at you today, but roughly half of all drugs and human beings that are smuggled into this country come through Arizona, and Maricopa County is a destination county. This is where the drugs come and where the people come before they are then shipped to other destinations. And that's in part because of a relatively unsecure southern border, our rather intricate interstate highway system, and just the vast expanse of Maricopa County. We're the 15th largest county in the nation by square miles. And we are the 4th largest county in the nation on the basis of population. We're now right about 4 million. Now, my involvement, too, is primarily with respect to addressing the criminal impact of human trafficking. Nevertheless, and thank you for the introduction, James, and for the invitation to talk about greater potential solutions to this. I believe I do have a voice that should be heard in this discussion, but I am not a policy driver in that regard, because ultimately this is the responsibility of the federal government in acting on our behalf as our sovereign representative in maintaining the integrity of our borders and in maintaining the integrity of who and what we are as a society. And first and foremost, too, it's important to reiterate something I'm sure you've heard over the course of the day, that we are a nation of immigrants. I dare say very few people in this room would be here but for the fact of immigration. My mother's family came here from Ireland, so I am not a native, and I get that. Nonetheless, nature abhors a vacuum, particularly when you talk about public policy and when you talk about an issue that is so readily adaptable to generating interest, both political and financial, in bringing people to want to fight over something. Now, I'm not here today to pander to any rhetoric or to any particular ethnic or racial group. So if you were looking for a rhetorical or xenophobic defense of laws against immigration in general, you're going to be sorely disappointed. I believe we've got to have an immigration policy and an immigration system within this nation that takes into account something that I think we've always wanted to have when it comes to immigration within our country. And that's, first, we want to know who is here, who is coming into our country. We have a right to know that as a nation because we are a sovereign nation. We have an inherent need to know that because of national security concerns. And we also want to make sure that we don't forget, as Fernando mentioned earlier, that there's a need to cut down on the number of people who are dying in the Sonoran Desert trying to enter this country illegally. I see that as an important human rights component that often does not get factored into the discussion. Woe to a nation that wants to get by on cheap labor at the expense of human lives. I don't want to be part of a system like that. Next, we also want to make sure that we're meeting business needs for workers. That is sort of the practical desire for having a sound immigration system. And going back over the centuries in this nation, some of the largest influx of immigrants over time has been recruiting particular ethnic groups to do particular work. And then lastly, we certainly want to make sure that we're incorporating the best and brightest who seek to be part of what I firmly believe is this world's last best hope for freedom. And bringing people here who want to be a part of that, all are welcome. Again, we just get back to the point, how do we welcome them and how does that happen? The current administration has been incredibly disappointing for many people on both sides of this issue. For those who believe that the rule of law component to dealing with our current issues with immigration has not been upheld, the most recent announcement by the administration and their deportation policies has sent the exact wrong message. You want to talk about feeding xenophobic rhetoric? They just handed it up on a platter. And instead, in many ways, I see it as just pandering for votes in the next election, which doesn't help address the issue either. Ultimately, in looking at solutions, they have to be based on the rule of law. That's how they can be applied consistently and fairly to everyone, regardless of a country of origin. They have to be based on objective data, instead of leaving in place the different quotas that we have, which are based on, at best, a loose understanding of where people were immigrating from in the past. And then there has to be a reasonable expectation for people who are following a legal process so that they can obtain legal residency or citizenship. Now, one of the possible approaches that I've talked about and that I shared with Todd several months ago requires several different components, many of which can be incorporated and done in parallel. One obviously involves operational control of the border. That's necessary to ensure that whatever administrative process we put in place is followed. If it's easier for people to circumvent that process, then that's what's going to be happening, particularly for those who are more desperate to seek better economic conditions on behalf of their families. Now, operational control of the border will also help us cut down on drug and human smuggling, and I've already mentioned the important national security component. Another aspect of what I believe we can and should do is to determine who is presently here. One possible approach is to declare a 3-year moratorium on prosecution of businesses or individuals who are here illegally, or businesses who have hired people who are not otherwise lawfully able to work here, to determine who actually is working. One aspect of that could be to say, okay, you step forward, you can obtain a temporary residency permit, identify who you're working for, and then we'll know which industries and which type of work are actually being performed by those who are currently in the country illegally. We will know for certain what that data is, which can then be a basis for a responsible immigration policy going forward, whether that incorporates a guest worker program or revamping a visa program and identifying the types of skill sets that are going to be required for businesses in our economy. We also want to do that for criminal purposes. If people have committed a felony, they need to be deported. If they commit a felony during this process, they need to be deported. We want everyone, again, to be focused on being law-abiding and being contributing people to our society. And then we'll be able to determine who's then eligible to remain at the end of those 3 years, looking at those who are continuing to work to demonstrate an ongoing need for a particular skill set or an industry. And then at that point in time, if you want to continue to work here in the United States, give them a long-term residency permit. Allow them to remain and continue to work here. Then businesses will have to pay up for the back payroll taxes, and that'll be a penalty for them. And then there should also be a processing fee incorporated into this background check process for that amount of time. And then for those who want to become citizens, they'll need to return to their country of origin and petition to come in the legal way. No one should get to become a citizen of the United States of America unless you followed a legal process. We then will be able to distinguish between those who simply want to be here and work and those who want to be full-fledged members of our country. By doing that, I think we'll be able to cut off both extreme ends of the debate. Those who are unwilling to allow anyone from another country to come here and become a citizen, and those whose singular goal is to allow everyone who can get into this country somehow to become a citizen. Now, in parallel with this, too, over this period of time, we've got to have bureaucratic reform. There has to be a reasonable expectation if someone petitions to come here with a legal residency that they're going to be able to do it in a reasonable time frame. Likewise with citizenship. Everyone who's done everything that we as a country have asked them to do should be made a citizen. And by purging the citizenship roles, we then can go and reform that process so that there's a reasonable expectation. 5, 7 years tops. I'll leave it up for the specifics to be figured out by smarter people than I later. But then asking people to go back to their country of origin and petition to come in a legal way isn't met with the same sense of disbelief that it could ever happen in their lifetime. And we can address that aspect of it too. Then there has to be an ongoing commitment to enforcement for the laws that we do have in place at the local, state, and federal levels. That partnership has to be there. I do not want to see a country in which we have a border patrol officer every other block. That's just not going to happen. And nobody would want to live in a society like that anyways. But there has to be an ongoing commitment to enforcement so that this entire reform process doesn't wind up being ignored, leaving us with the same situation that we've got now after an effort at reform back in the mid-'80s. We have to address it. We have to come at it with an intent in trying to achieve those policy objectives, recognizing who we are as a nation and who we want to be, and what the basis has got to be for that discussion and what we're going to seek to do over time. Everybody agrees the status quo is unacceptable. So continuing to pander and deal with so-called solutions around the edges is not going to help us. That's my idea. All right.